Welcome students. Now we are going to see what is game theory. So game theory is one of the main strategic behavior. So under game theory we are we have some other main key terms like players, strategies or payoff matrix. We can see many names under that, and we have one more heading which is actually called as Nash Equilibrium, which is each player chooses a strategy that is optimal given the strategy of the other player. So here we can have the strategies can be defined with the help of some games. So how they are, what is the strategy they are actually mean, or what they are actually going to, what strategy they are actually going to take, or just move on. So whether the strategy is actually a dominant strategy, or whether it is how it is actually always to be more optimal. So generally we can see a strategy which is actually dominant if it is always optimal. So when if it is optimal, we can able to make it as a dominant strategy. We can see one by one in this given slides. So first we have a small example under game theory. We have an advertising example. So here we have two firms, firm A and firm B. Firm E is kept on the left side and firm B is kept on the right side, and here they have two options. Firm A advertise whether they can advertise, or whether they can choose not to advertise, that is don't advertise. Same as for firm B, we have two options. One is to advertise, the other one is not to advertise, that is don't advertise. So without knowing what the other firm chooses, see, just imagine both the firms are actually rivalry firms. Okay, so in that case, how they can choose? So without knowing what the other firm does, what they are actually going to choose, what strategy they are actually going to mean with, that is what we are going to see under the game theory. So first thing, so here we have the options firm A and firm B. So in the first case, here we have advertise and advertise. If you have a quadrant angle, you can just see firm A also advertises and firm B also advertises. But firm A chooses actually more. So what is the optimal strategy for firm A if firm B chooses to advertise? So even if firm B is also advertising, what happens to the optimal strategy of the firm A? So if firm A chooses to advertise, the payoff is 4. Payoff in the sense what they are actually leaving off, that's actually 4. So otherwise the payoff is 2. If they don't advertise, the payoff is actually 2. So generally the optimal strategy is just to advertise, because whether they actually don't know what the other firm actually chooses. So in that case, if they can choose that to advertise, and it can be called as one of the dominant strategy, and they can choose whether they never think about what the other firms does. They can decide on their own whether for their firm to get move on, and they have to advertise. So that is their main strategy that should be there. And generally here they have the choices. Here the optimal strategy can be is to advertise. Then the same diagram, it can be explained on the other point of view. What is the optimal strategy of the firm A if firm B chooses not to advertise? See, for the first one, firm A advertise, this quadrant you can able to see don't advertise here. So firm A advertises and firm B don't advertises. What will happen? If firm A chooses to advertise, the payoff here is 5. That is the maximum option. Then otherwise the payoff is actually, if they don't advertise, the payoff is actually 3. So again, if we compare both, the optimal strategy is actually to advertise. They have to choose advertise here, regardless of what firm B decides to do. That is the main thing. So they does not know what the other firm does, and they choose it on their own, and that can be called as the optimal strategy of firm A, and they have actually maximum, they have just chosen to advertise. So the dominant strategy of the firm A is to advertise. This can be called as a dominant strategy regardless of what the other firm does. So, and same as what is the optimal strategy of the firm B if firm A chooses to advertise. Firm A chooses to advertise. What is because firm B also doesn't know what firm A does. So in that case, what will happen? So if firm B chooses to advertise, the payoff is actually 3. Otherwise, he can able to go for don't advertise. He can go for 1. The payoff is actually 1. So the optimal strategy is actually to advertise for firm B also. And what is the optimal strategy of the firm B if firm A chooses not to advertise. If firm A chooses not to advertise, there is one option in this first quadrant. Firm A does not advertise, but firm B advertises. What will happen? The maximum choices is there for firm B. So the choice of firm A is got reduced. So if firm B chooses to advertise, the payoff is actually 5. Otherwise, the payoff is actually 2. So the optimal strategy is actually to advertise here. Same as, regardless of what the firm A decides to do, the optimal strategy for firm B is just to advertise. They doesn't mean about what they actually do, and if they have a concern, there will be again a problem. So that not concerned if they just think about what the other firm decides. Just like the player while they are playing a game, what we might not know what the other person decides, but we will just have our own view. That is the way how we can define in a game theory. So the dominant strategy of firm B is to advertise here also, because they are also choosing to advertise. Because the maximum chances is actually to advertise. This is one example, and the dominant strategy for firm A is to advertise, and the dominant strategy for firm B is also to advertise. So they are not actually meaning about what the other firm does. They will just think about what they can do. And the Nash equilibrium for both the firms is also to advertise here. Here we have a second example, a second advertising example. While we compare with the previous one, we have these quadrants. Advertise, same as here we have firm A and firm B, advertise and don't advertise, we have all these options. Same as for the second advertising example, we have firm A and firm B, and here also we have advertise and don't advertise as their options. But what happened, in the last quadrant, we can able to see a difference here. If we just compare with the previous one, all the three quadrants are actually same, but the last quadrant is actually different. So here 3,2, but here it's 6,2. There it makes changes. What happens here? Just see. What is the optimal strategy of the firm A if firm B chooses to advertise? What will happen? If firm B chooses to advertise, the firm A chooses to advertise, the payoff is actually 4. Otherwise, they have a payoff is actually for 2. This can be the optimal strategy as before, to advertise. What is the optimal strategy of the firm A if firm B chooses not to advertise? That means A is advertising and B is not advertising here. So A chooses to advertise and then the payoff is actually 5. Otherwise, the payoff is actually 6. In this case, the optimal strategy is not to advertise. Why it is actually meaning here the payoff is 6. Payoff is actually, if you don't advertise what you actually make, this payoff is actually 6. We'll explain that one clearly. So in this case, the optimal strategy is not to advertise by, which is the most one, is not to advertise by firm A. So here we have whether they have to choose the not to advertise option. Okay. So the optimal strategy of the firm A depends on which strategy is chosen by firms B. Firm A does not have a dominant strategy here. So they will again wait and they will decide what strategy the other firm does. And in that case, what will happen? Firm A does not have a dominant strategy. They will again go back, or depends on what strategy the other firm is actually doing. If they are not advertising, they will also move for not advertising option. So in this case again, it is a depending strategy where we are actually moving on, and in that case the firm A does not have a dominant strategy over here. And what is the optimal strategy of the firm B if firm A chooses to advertise? So if firm B chooses to advertise here, the payoff is 3, otherwise the payoff is actually 1. Better it has to advertise here. Same as, what is the optimal strategy of the firm B if firm A chooses not to advertise? If firm B chooses to advertise, but the firm A chooses not to advertise, the payoff is actually 5. Otherwise, it is actually 2. And better again, the optimal strategy is actually to advertise here. So this is the comparison what you can able to make between the firms, and you can able to make the optimal strategy of any firms. Regardless of what firm A decides to do, the optimal strategy of the firm B is to advertise over here. So they are actually moving on to advertise. Maximum things is actually for them to move on to advertise, because they are giving more preference while comparatively between the advertise and not advertise options, they are actually moving on to advertise. That is why this is actually called as the dominant strategy of the firm B is to advertise. And dominant strategy for firm B is to advertise. If firm B chooses to advertise, then the optimal strategy of the firm B is also, so firm A is also to advertise. The Nash equilibrium is for both the firms is to advertise on the all together. It has to be advertised. This is actually called as the Nash equilibrium stage for both the firms to advertise. And here we have one more option, which is one more main idea, which is called as prisoner's dilemma. Prisoner's dilemma. Here we can able to think about what think about this again. One of the game theory. The game theory is actually fully explained over here. So just imagine that there are two suspects who are arrested for armed robbery, and they are immediately separated. And if convicted, they will get a term of 10 years in prison. However, the evidence is not sufficient to convict them of more than the crime of possessing stolen goods, which carries a sentence of only 1 year. The suspects are told the following: if you confess and your accomplice does not, you will go free. If you do not confess and your accomplice does, you will get 10 years in prison. If you both confess, you will both get 5 years in prison. This is the thing. So I'll come again. The suspects are told the following: if you confess and your accomplice does not, you will go free. If you do not confess and your accomplice does, you will get 10 years in prison. And if you both confess and you will both get 5 years in prison, if you both confess, you will both get 5 years in prison.